What's up, everybody? Mel and Chris here again with Sunrise Compass. Let's continue on with our physical inventory discussion. So Chris, I know you have a great interest in physical inventories. How did that evolve?
Sure. My experience with physical inventories, when I first started getting involved with IT 20 some years ago, one of my first projects was to design a physical inventory and cycle count system. And I recall very vividly speaking with my subject matter experts, what does this look like? What do you want to evaluate? What are you trying to accomplish? And not getting a really good understanding of it from them. So really over that period of time and ever since, I've kind of been a student of the documentation, and I started reading some of the documentation put out by standard organizations and also a lot of the literature that has been published for the warehousing and retail industries over the years.
What are the common functionalities used in D365 physical inventories?
Probably the most common one that you're going to see is scheduling a cycle count plan or using spot counting to do individual counts. Typically with a physical inventory, you're setting up a cycle count plan that looks at your main inventory locations. So you're going to set the criteria to probably exclude any of your inbound or outbound locations, anything with active work against it or reservations against it. And this is really important to keep in mind if you're creating a cycle count plan where you don't want to look at your outbound locations, because one, if that material is going to be sent out, you don't want someone counting it and then bringing it back into inventory, which will essentially double your on-hand count. And if they try to make an adjustment against it, that material is considered picked, and so they can't make any updates to the on-hand quantities anyway. So best practice, stay away from those kind of transitory locations. Focus on your main storage locations for the inventory. Preparation for a physical inventory is huge. So putting up those do not inventory signs, making sure that we called it flat and flush. Things were put away in inventory in ways that made it easy for people to count. So stacked up nicely so people could kind of say, oh, this is 5 units tall, 5 units across.
All right, so I got a physical inventory coming up. I use D365 F&O, and there's no out-of-the-box physical inventory module. Do you have some tips for me?
One piece of functionality that I think is really undervalued is the count empty locations. Now, what's really important for people to keep in mind when they're setting up a warehouse, they don't want to go overboard with creating a lot of locations that don't exist, because counting an empty location, it's an easy way to verify your inventory. And if you think about it, there's a very good chance that somebody could just have dumped some inventory in an empty location and the system would have no way of ever knowing about it. So counting empty locations is a very good way to find out about that. And the best part of it, an empty location is going to be very easy to count because there's nothing in it.
What are your wish list items for PIs that Microsoft could incorporate into D365?
One thing that I would really like it if Microsoft could take a look at this is when you reject cycle count work, it doesn't automatically create new rework to do a count for that location. Now, when you think about this in the context of a physical inventory, where you're trying to prove to an auditor that you've counted everything in your warehouse, this is it feels like a little bit of a gap, because what you should be doing is counting it, and if the count gets rejected, it's immediately recounted, so you've got new work. And especially to tie all of this information together in a final report that you can hand off to an auditor that they can understand. Again, that would be a really solid piece of functionality if they could add that. Another piece of functionality that I've never totally understood was approving and rejecting cycle count work is done directly in D365 if cycle count thresholds aren't set. What makes this somewhat difficult to understand is that the supervisor that's approving these or rejecting these counts isn't physically in front of the inventory. So it's hard to say what rationale they're using to approve or reject these counts because they're not doing it. Having the ability to do that directly on the mobile app through, say, an additional piece of count work or some other method would also make a lot of sense because they're physically there and they can verify the on-hand totals that the count is correct. Another piece of functionality is counting by dimension. So in D365, the way that you count dimensions is hierarchical, meaning you count by warehouse, by item, by location, and then if you have additional storage dimensions set up like batch, serial, license plate, those also have to be included in the count process to complete the cycle count work. Now, this doesn't always make sense. If you're using a license plate, for example, you kind of already know the batch and serial, and you may not want to count that. You may not want to actually have to scan that information because you've got the license plate. If you're transacting just on that, maybe all you need. So being able to control that as opposed to having to scan each and every piece of information makes it a much faster and a lot less painful process. Probably the next big wish that I have for physical inventories and the cycle count process in D365 is the ability to generate new license plates on the mobile app while you're doing a count. So it's very common for people to come across inventory that isn't labeled, especially if you're using license plates, which by definition have to be unique. You need to create a new one on the fly. That really should be part of the count process where you're entering, if you need it, batch, serial, and then just getting a brand new LP so that you can reflect that you've accurately adjusted this material into your inventory where you found it.
Great info, Chris. Any final thoughts for us?
Absolutely. D365 cycle count processing, especially with advanced warehousing, is an incredibly powerful tool. There's a lot of flexibility, a lot of complexity that you can add in, and you can do a variety of things to make it a really great solution for your client. The one thing I would really want to drive home is keep in mind just flexibility and the wide variety of needs that an organization might have to conduct their counts. We tend to think of physical inventories as somewhat static processes, but they're really not. They can be done for a whole variety of reasons. And again, it's very common for people to do physical inventories and cycle counts as a means of giving a more complete overall inventory control process.
I love talking about physical inventories because I've been interacting with them my entire working life. Figuring out how to get those counts done quickly and posted is a challenge in any system, but it's awesome to see how we're doing that in D365 for our clients. All right, join us next time on Sunrise Compass. See you later.